Have you ever wondered what secrets lie just beyond the quiet of the night? Tonight, I want to take you on a calm journey through a story that will soothe your mind and help you drift gently into peaceful sleep. Are you ready to close your eyes and listen with me? Before we begin, I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? And what time is it where you are? Feel free to drop a comment and let me know. I love imagining all the different places my story reaches as you settle in to listen. The humid West African air buzzed with the sounds of live birds shrieking overhead, goats bleating in the distance, and the rhythmic tapping of women pounding millet in wooden mortar. This was Jufure, a small Mandinka village nestled along the banks of the River Gambia. For generations, life here had followed the steady pulse of tradition. Births were celebrated, boys became men through time-honored rituals, and ancestors were revered through stories passed from mouth to ear like sacred treasures. In the heart of this village, under the thick canopy of a baobab tree, Binta Kint went into labor. The village midwife, a woman with a face creased by decades of wisdom and experience, knelt beside her, whispering prayers to the spirits. Binta's cries echoed into the night, a symphony of pain and strength. The villagers waited quietly, understanding that a new life entering the world was a sacred moment not to be disturbed. As the first light of dawn seeped into the village, a cry pierced the air, strong, defiant, and insistent. It was the cry of a boy. The midwife smiled, wiping the sweat from Binta's brow. She lifted the baby and proclaimed, "It is a strong child." Later that day, the baby's father, Omoro Kint, performed the naming ceremony. The boy was cradled in Omoro's strong arms, wrapped in a soft cotton cloth. Omoro walked outside the hut, into the sunlight, and raised the child toward the sky. "His name is Kunta," he said proudly, "Kunta Kint, of the Kint clan." He then whispered into the baby's ear, "Behold, this is your name, Kunta. Hold it in your heart and never forget who you are." Kunta's birth was not just a personal event, it was communal. Everyone in Jufure took pride in him, for he represented the continuation of their legacy. He was one of the Kints, a family known for their literacy in Arabic, their scholarship, and their devout practice of Islam. His grandfather had made a pilgrimage to Mecca. His father taught the children to recite from the Quran. His mother taught them Mandinka history, and the Griot's village storytellers wove Kunta's lineage into the oral traditions they kept alive. From a young age, Kunta was curious. His eyes followed the flight of birds. His ears caught the smallest rustling in the grass, and his fingers always found something to grasp, be it soil, stone, or leaf. He followed his father to the fields, asking endless questions. Why do we pray 5 times a day? Why do the goats stay in one pen and not the other? Why does the moon change shape? His father answered patiently, seeing in the boy a mind hungry for understanding. When Kunta turned 5, he began his first lessons in Arabic. Sitting cross-legged on mats with other boys, he learned to trace the elegant letters in the sand before moving to ink and parchment. The muezzin's call to prayer became a part of his internal clock. By 7, he could recite long verses from the Quran with precision. Omoro was proud Kunta was becoming a true son of Jufure. As he grew, Kunta's world expanded. He learned to care for the goats and cows, to harvest groundnuts, and to fish in the river. His mother taught him to respect the elders and to listen to the Griot stories with reverence. One of Kunta's favorite stories was of his ancestor, who had once stood against an invading tribe and saved the village. The lesson was clear. To know your ancestors was to know yourself. At the age of 12, Kunta's life reached a pivotal moment. He was to enter manhood training Kamban. This rite of passage would separate him from his family and immerse him in the bush for several weeks under the strict guidance of village elders and warriors. It was not just about endurance, it was about character. The boys would learn to survive in the wild, to defend themselves, and most importantly, to carry the responsibilities of a man in command. The day of departure arrived. Kunta's heart raced with anticipation and pride. He was dressed in a simple white cloth, his head shaved, and his feet bare. His mother embraced him tightly, tears brimming in her eyes. "Remember everything your father taught you. Be strong, be honorable," she whispered. In the forest, the boys were pushed to their limits. They ran 4 miles, built shelters, hunted small game, and slept under the stars. They listened to stories of the ancestors, told by firelight, and learned the secrets of herbs and healing from the village shaman. Most importantly, they learned the code of honor: never lie, never steal, and never forget who you are. Kunta excelled. He was swift of foot, sharp of mind, and respectful of his elders. When it came time for the final trial, the test of courage, he stood firm while others faltered. He faced down a wild boar with nothing but a wooden spear and the lessons of his people ringing in his ears. When the boys returned to the village, they were no longer boys. The drums beat in celebration, women ululated in joy, and the griots chanted the names of each new man. Kunta walked tall, proud, and changed. His father embraced him with a warrior's grip, no longer looking at him as a child, but as a man. That evening, under the stars, Kunta sat with his father and listened to the deeper truths of his family. Omoro told him of the ancestors who had come before the scholars, the warriors, the traders, and the men of faith. "You are Kunta Kint," he said solemnly, "of the proud Kint clan. There is nothing more sacred than your name and your blood." In that moment, Kunta felt a powerful sense of belonging. He was not just one boy in a small village. He was a continuation of a great story, a living link in an unbroken chain that stretched far into the past. He could not know that the chain was about to be shattered, that in the shadows beyond the river, strange men with iron weapons and greed in their hearts were watching. That soon, everything he knew would be torn away. But for now, Kunta Kint was a son of Africa, whole and unbroken, walking beneath the stars, proud of his name, his people, and his place in the world. But for now, Kunta Kint was a son of Africa, whole and unbroken, walking beneath the stars, proud of his name, his people, and his place in the world. The morning sun filtered gently through the leaves as Kunta walked alone beyond the village boundaries, a small woven basket in hand. His task was simple: gather firewood for the cooking fires. It was something he'd done dozens of times before, yet today he felt different, more confident, more alive. He had returned from manhood training not long ago, and every step now felt charged with purpose. He hummed a tune his mother used to sing, rhythmically moving between trees, plucking dry sticks, stacking them under his arm. But the forest, so familiar, suddenly felt strange. The bird song faded, the air grew still. He felt it before he saw them, eyes watching. Out of the shadows they came, 4 men, foreign, dark-skinned, but dressed differently, boots, strange clothes, iron shackles in hand. Kunta dropped his bundle and turned to run, but it was too late. A net tangled his feet. He kicked, bit, shouted, "Help! Help me!" But the silence of the woods swallowed his voice. They beat him, bound him, gagged him, dragged through the bush like a wild animal. Days blurred together as Kunta, bloodied and bruised, was marched with other captives through forests, fields, and swamps toward the coast. They were herded like cattle, roped by the neck and ankles, whipped for the slightest resistance. Some collapsed, some died. No one was buried. He tried to memorize the path, to count steps or landmarks, thinking he could escape, but his mind was fogged by hunger, pain, and the sound of weeping. Then they reached it, the coast. Kunta had never seen the ocean before. The vastness of it made his heart sink. And floating upon it, a horror beyond comprehension, was a massive ship. It loomed like a mountain of wood and iron, belching smoke and shouting in a tongue he did not understand. The air stank of rot and human waste. He realized the truth too late. He would not be going home. In the hold of the slave ship, darkness became his world. He was shackled at the ankles and wrists, pressed body to body with strangers who cried, vomited, or stared with vacant eyes. Rats scurried across feet and faces. The stench was unbearable. They were fed slop in wooden bowls and allowed on deck only briefly, for air and humiliation. The ship rocked endlessly. Time became meaningless. The days bled into weeks. He heard the sobs of men who had once been proud hunters, teachers, and fathers. He heard the prayers of Muslims whispered in the night. And he heard the silence of those who had given up. Some tried to jump overboard. Some succeeded. One night, he whispered his name aloud. Kunta, just to remind himself it was still real. That he still existed. He promised himself, I will not forget who I am. He imagined his father's voice, his mother's hands, the stories told by the griots under the moon. That memory became his shield. Storms came, the ship groaned, water flooded the hold. Screams rang out as the sea claimed the weakest. Kunta held on. When the storm passed, the crew threw the dead overboard. He did not cry. He clenched his jaw and repeated his name again. Kunta. Weeks later, the coast of America came into view, a place he'd never heard of. Now the beginning of a nightmare he could not escape. They were herded ashore, blinking in the sunlight, their chains clinking with each step. Stripped, inspected, prodded like livestock. A man with pale skin and a wide brim that pointed to Kunta. A paper changed hands. He was sold. A name was barked at him. Toby. He didn't understand. The man shouted it again. Toby. Kunta stared back in silence. He was Kunta. A whip cracked. Toby. Kunta screamed, fell to his knees, but still, he said nothing. They beat him until his body gave out, but in his mind, he repeated it over and over. Kunta, Kunta, Kunta. Even in chains, he would not let them take his name. Not now, not ever. Kunta awoke to the smell of damp wood and the sound of chickens scratching in the dirt. His back ached, his wrists were raw, and the bruises along his side throbbed with every breath. He lay on a pile of hay in a crude cabin, the walls thin, the door ajar. Outside, strange voices spoke in English, a language he didn't understand, and a bell clanged somewhere in the distance. It was morning on the plantation. He had been bought by a man named John Waller, who owned land in Spotsylvania County, Virginia. The Waller plantation stretched across open fields lined with rows of tobacco, cotton, and corn. The air smelled of sweat, mud, and ash. Slaves were everywhere, young and old. Some stooped with age, others hollow-eyed and cautious. They gave Kunta new clothes, rough linen shirt, worn trousers, no shoes. He was stripped of his Mandinka identity in every visible way, but not in spirit. He refused to respond to the name Toby, refused to speak unless necessary. The other slaves whispered that he was wild, that he had the devil in him. But some, like an older man named Fiddler, saw something different. Boys got fire. Fiddler murmured, "Don't let it burn you down." Fiddler, a kind and clever man, had been assigned to train Kunta to teach him English, the rules of the plantation, how to survive. He tried to help gently, but Kunta met each lesson with silence or scorn. "My name is Kunta Kint," he said again and again, struggling with English syllables. Fiddler would sigh, shake his head. "You can call yourself King of Africa, but you say that to Massa and he'll have your hide." Still, Fiddler taught. He spoke of survival, not submission. You don't forget who you are, but you learn how to play their game until the day you can stop playing. Kunta was put to work in the fields. His hands blistered on the hoe. His muscles screamed from bending and pulling. From sunrise to sundown, overseers barked orders and carried whips that bit like snakes. One wrong move, one slow pace, and the lash found flesh, but Kunta endured. He studied the land, watched the guards, counted steps in the night. Escape was a constant thought. He ran once through the trees, over creeks, eating roots, drinking from puddles. He made it for 4 days before hounds tracked him down. The punishment was brutal. His feet were partially amputated to prevent future attempts. Still, he didn't speak the name Toby. He wouldn't let them win. Over the years, Kunta adjusted not in heart, but in rhythm. He married a house slave named Belle. She was strong, intelligent, and fierce in her own quiet way. Together they had a daughter, Kizzy. Kunta saw in her the future of his bloodline, the continuation of his people. He taught her Mandinka words, told her stories of Jafur and the mighty Griots. He whispered to her the truth of her name, her people, her power. "You are not what they say you are," he told her by firelight. "You are not just a slave. You are Kizzy Kint, daughter of Kunta Kint, and we come from kings." He worked the fields with a limp, the memory of his escape carved into every step. Yet he kept his eyes forward, his spirit unbowed. Others looked to him not just as a fellow slave, but as a reminder that identity could not be whipped out, that even in chains, a man could be free in his mind. Years passed, owners changed, the world outside shifted. Rumors of rebellion and war began to circulate. But through it all, Kunta remained, a tree with deep roots. And though his voice grew quiet with age, though his hair turned grey, and his hands calloused, the stories he told Kizzy remained alive. In her, he had planted the seed of memory, and memory, he believed, could outlast anything, even slavery.
The seasons turn, like the pages of a well-worn book on the Waller plantation. Where Kunta Kint and Belle lived, their lives a quiet rebellion against the bonds that sought to chain their spirit. Years passed, etched into their faces like deep lines carved by time and hardship. But through it all, their love for each other and their hope for their daughter, Kizzy, remained an unbreakable thread. Belle was unlike anyone Kunta had ever met. She was sharp-eyed and steady, with a voice soft but unwavering. Though life on the plantation was harsh, Belle carried herself with a dignity that refused to be crushed. Her hands, calloused from the endless labor in the kitchen and field, also tenderly caressed Kizzy's hair, smoothing it as if trying to protect the child from the storm of slavery that surrounded them. Kizzy grew up beneath Belle's watchful eyes and Kunta's guarded presence. From the moment she took her first breath, Kizzy carried the weight of a legacy one written in the sweat and tears of ancestors thousands of miles away, but alive in the stories whispered softly after the masters had gone to bed. These stories, passed from mother to daughter, kept the spirit of their people alive when every day threatened to snatch it away. Belle and Kunta were careful with their lessons, teaching Kizzy in hushed tones about the Mandinka language, the rhythms of the songs from their homeland, and the proud names of those who had come before them. "You are not what they say you are," Belle told Kizzy one night, as the firelight danced on the walls of their small cabin. "You are Kizzy Kint, daughter of Kunta Kint. You come from kings, But it was more than words. It was in the way Belle sang lullabies with unfamiliar melodies. The way Kunta pressed his hands to his chest when he spoke of joy. These were the secret threads weaving their family's history into the fabric of a life meant to erase it. Life on the plantation was a cruel and exhausting rhythm of work and punishment. From dawn till dusk, Kunta labored in the fields alongside other enslaved men and women, planting and harvesting crops under the watchful eyes of overseers who wielded whips and cold cruelty. The sun beat down mercilessly, the soil was unforgiving, and the weight of change was both physical and invisible, rooted deep in the laws and customs of a world that saw Kunta and his family as less than human. Yet, amid the struggle, moments of humanity glimmered. In stolen whispers at night, in shared meals, and in the fierce protection Kunta showed for Belle and Kizzy, the family found strength. Belle's cooking was a small comfort, a taste of the world they had lost but refused to forget. As Kizzy grew, she learned to navigate the dangers of the plantation. She watched the eyes of the masters, learned the faces of the other slaves, and understood the unspoken rules that governed every step. She was taught to appear obedient and humble in public, but was never allowed to forget the stories her parents had given her in secret. Then, one cruel day, everything changed. Kizzy was taken from the only home she had ever known. The plantation was selling her to a new owner. The words fell like thunder sails. Separation! Unknown baton shattered the fragile peace that Belle and Kunta had fought to preserve. Kizzy's small hands gripped Belle's tightly as they were pulled apart. Belle's eyes burned with silent tears, and Kunta's fists clenched in helpless rage. But no cry or plea could stop the cold wheels of a system built on the trade of human life. Kizzy was moved miles away to a new plantation, where the names and faces were strangers and the air smelled of fear and despair. Yet, even in that harsh new world, Kizzy carried a legacy of her parents. She remembered Belle's songs, Kunta's teachings, and the pride of the Kint name that no chain could break. Back on the Waller plantation, Belle and Kunta mourned but did not surrender. They found solace in each other and in the hope that their daughter would live on not just in body but in spirit. This separation was not the end, but the beginning of a story that would stretch across generations. For Kizzy, the journey was only starting. She would face new trials, pain, and moments that threatened to erase her past. But in the deepest corners of her heart, the stories of Jufior and the voice of Kunta Kint echoed, a constant reminder that she belonged to something larger than herself. This was the root from which all future branches would grow. The story of Kizzy Kint did not end with her forced removal from the Waller plantation. Though separated from her parents, the roots planted by Kunta and Belle continued to grow, stretching deep into the generations that followed. It was in the children and grandchildren of Kizzy that the spirit of the Kint family would flourish anew, battling the chains of slavery and carving out lives of strength, courage, and dignity. Kizzy bore a son named George, a boy who would come to be known across plantations and counties by the nickname Chicky George. From an early age, George showed us his youth was filled with moments of rebellion, but also with undeniable talent. George had a gift. He was a gifted The Cockford's brutal, often illegal events were a form of entertainment for whites and blacks alike, and George mastered the art of training and breeding gamecocks, a skill that brought him a strange form of status even within the oppressive confines of slavery. His nickname, Chicken George, was earned not only through his skill, but through his larger-than-life personality. He was cocky, quick-witted, and fearless, often challenging the status quo with a smirk and a daring glance. But George was more than a... Behind his bravado lay a deep sense of pride in his heritage, passed down from his grandmother Kizzy and his grandfather Kunta. Though the Kinta name had been lost to many, the family's knowledge of who they were, where they came from, and the meaning of freedom remained a silent, powerful force. George's life was marked by constant movement. Owners sold him and bought him like property, but wherever he went, he left a mark. His cleverness and courage earned him grudging respect, but also suspicion and punishment. Yet, George was never broken. He found ways to resist, subtle and bold, refusing to speak a master's name, helping others escape, holding secret gatherings where stories of Africa and freedom were shared in whispers. He taught his own children to remember who they were, even when the world told them to forget. One of his sons was Tom, a man who would become a blacksmith, crafting not only iron but a legacy. Tom was strong, quiet, and steady, embodying the resilience of his ancestors. He worked the forge with purpose, shaping tools and horseshoes, creating something lasting in a world designed to deny him permanence. Tom lived through the Civil War and the emancipation that followed. The world was shifting, sometimes slowly, sometimes violently. Freedoms once denied became possibilities, and the Kent descendants stood at the cusp of a new era. Though the scars of slavery remained etched in their bodies and memories, the family carried forward the unyielding flame of identity and hope. The stories of Kunta, Belle, Kesey, George, and Tom are threads in a tapestry, a tale of survival, resistance, and the power of remembering. The winds of change swept slowly but steadily across the land where the descendants of Kunta Kinte had endured so much. The bitter chains of slavery began to loosen with the roar of the Civil War and the proclamations of freedom. But freedom, as many learned, was not simply the breaking of physical bonds. It was the hard and winding path toward reclaiming identity, dignity, and a future. Tom, the blacksmith and son of Chicken George, lived through these turbulent years. He saw the plantations empty, heard the rumble of armies, and watched the faces of men and women around him transform from enslaved to free, yet burdened with the weight of a past that refused to be forgotten. Tom, like his ancestors before him, understood that the fight was not only for liberty, but for the survival of a culture that had been nearly erased. He taught his children the importance of holding on to their names, their stories, and their history. Generations later, those stories would be passed down to a man named Alex Haley, a man who would spend years piecing together the fragmented history of his family, his roots across oceans and centuries. Alex grew up in a different America, one of segregation, racial tension, and the slow stirrings of civil rights. Yet, he was driven by a deep curiosity and a burning need to know where he came from. The stories told by his elders were often fragmented, lost in time, or drowned out by the harsh realities of their present lives. Undeterred, Alex became a writer and he traveled to West Africa, tracing the path that Kunta Kinte had taken centuries before. He interviewed elders, scoured historical records, and followed the fragile threads that linked him to a past that seemed almost mythical. His work culminated in the book Roots, a groundbreaking narrative that brought to light the harrowing journey of his ancestor, the enduring spirit of the Kinte family, and the larger story of the African diaspora. Roots became more than a personal family history. It became a beacon for millions seeking to understand their own pasts and the legacy of slavery. It challenged the silence and forgetfulness imposed by centuries of oppression. Through Roots, the story of Kunta Kinte was reborn. His name echoed across the world as a symbol of resistance, survival, and the unbreakable bond of heritage. Alex Haley's journey was a testament to the power of memory and the importance of reclaiming history not only for himself, but for all who carry the scars and hopes of those who came before. The story of Kunta Kinte and his descendants reminds us that no matter how far one is removed from the past, the roots remain deep, strong, and vital.